Hey y'all, it's Miss G, and this video is a review of the mid-chapter 3 test where we're going to go over the solutions and the answers to the problems on this mid-chapter 3 test. So you should be watching this to do test corrections. You should have a separate sheet of paper and you should be following along and solving the problems along with me for any of the questions that you did not get a full star next to, which means you did not get all the pieces correct. So even if you got check marks next to 3 of the pieces but not the other 2, you are going to rework the entire problem from start to finish if you did not get a star. All right, so let's get started. Question number 1. So the instructions say graph. All right, graph the following linear equation using a table of values. Here's your table, and fill in the blanks that describe what your graph looks like. Do not put spaces when typing in your answers. Put a comma in between your 2 values, all right? Because remember, this was on Canvas, and so those are the instructions that were given to you. So here is our linear equation, y equals 3x minus 2. So immediately I would be thinking y equals mx plus b, all right? Because that's what we've been talking about. The first question says, the y-intercept of the graph is, well, the y-intercept is b, so b equals -2. If I were to write it as an ordered pair, do you see the parentheses here on the outside? I would write that as 0, -2. All right. If you had just put -2, we decided to accept that answer, but this is the fully correct answer here for the y-intercept of the graph. The next question says the slope is, and I would look here and I want to find m, and that is 3. So the answer would have been 3, or you could have put 3 over 1. Both of those would have been acceptable, all right? Because right there is that slope that hangs out with x. The next question says the ordered pair blank is a solution of the linear equation. Do not list the y-intercept. So this is where our table of values comes in handy, because right here on our table of values, this x comma y is an ordered pair, okay? It's also called a coordinate point. It's also called a solution to the equation, because when we plug in a value for x and solve for y, that's how we plot the line. And any point that falls along a line is a solution of a linear equation. So we need to be able to build out this table of values, and then we will be able to answer the question about the ordered pair. All right, so when we fill out a table of values, because the instructions say that we need to use a table of values to graph, okay? We know how to graph from just an equation like this, but the instructions asked us to use this table. The very first number you should choose is always 0, so that means we're going to have y equals 3 times 0, where I plugged in the 0 for x, minus 2. So this goes away, and that means it's just -2. So the y-intercept, which we've already answered over here, is 0, -2. So I can plot that as 0, and then I come down 2. Then I want to pick another number. I'm going to go ahead and choose 1. So I would say y equals 3 times 1, that's where the x is, minus 2. So that is 3 minus 2, which equals 1. So that ordered pair is 1, comma, 1, because we're choosing the x value and then the y value that corresponds with it. So if I were to plot this point, that would be 1, comma, 1. So I'd go over 1 and up 1. All right, and then I need to fill out my last row here. And so I'm going to go ahead and just pick 2, because it looks like I have plenty of space to graph this line here, and picking 2 is an option. So I'm going to say y equals 3 times 2 minus 2. 3 times 2 is 6, minus 2 equals 4. So I would have 2, comma, 4. All right, so if I were to plot this, I would go over 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, up 4, and then I would be able to draw my line because it asked me to actually graph the equation. It didn't ask me to just plot the points, it said graph it, okay? So you would have needed to draw a line through your points. Now, you might not have chosen these exact values. Maybe you chose -1, or maybe you chose 3 or -2, and that's okay, all right? But these are the examples that I have here for you, okay? So when we come back to trying to make sure that we answer all the pieces of the test question, it says the ordered pair, meaning I'm looking in this column right here, which ordered pair is a solution of the linear equation? Do not list the y-intercept, which means I shouldn't list this one. So I'm going to choose to put in 1, 1, because there's already these parentheses here. You could have put in 2, 4. You could have put in, I think, -1. Excuse me. -5 is also a solution when you choose -1. So you could have put in any of those that would have worked. You would have had -1 down here at -5. Okay, so this is how you worked question number 1. Let's move on to number 2. Okay, so number 2 says, graph the following linear equation on your paper. So we're going to graph, all right, hence why there's a graph here on our paper, and fill in the blanks that describe what your graph looks like. Do not put spaces when typing in your answers. Put a comma in between your two values. So here is my equation, and I'm immediately going to say y equals mx plus b. All right, and so I have two different ways I could solve this. I could go ahead and create myself a table of values, okay, and I could have gone ahead and created my own and solved it similarly to question number 1, y equals 1/2 x plus 2. And so I would pick 3 values and I would be able to plot. Or I could simply graph by knowing what the y-intercept is and the slope. So we're going to do it both ways just so that you can see how you can check your work, okay? So let's start here at the top. The y-intercept of the graph is, well, I can see that b equals 2, okay? Which means the coordinate point for the y-intercept is actually 0, 2, because x is always 0 on the y-intercept. So this would be the correct answer. We also accepted the answer 2 for people that were thinking b equals 2. Even though you see these parentheses here, this should have let you know that we were looking for the coordinate point option. Okay, this is paying attention to those little details. The next question says the slope is, well, we know that slope is m, so I would look here and I would say the slope is 1/2. You could have also put 0.5, okay, and either of those would have been accepted. Then it asks for an ordered pair that is a solution of the linear equation. Do not list the y-intercept, okay? So we could first just graph the line based on our information here with having the y-intercept and the slope. So in order to do that, I would first plot b, or the y-intercept, and b is at 2, so I'd go 1, 2, okay? And then the second step when we're graphing from y equals mx plus b is then we use m to move, okay? So I would start at my 2, and I would use my slope up 1 over 2. I would rise up 1 over 2. I would rise up 1 over 2, and I would be able to, oh goodness gracious, straight line, straight line, straight line, straight line. Not sure how good that went. And I would be able to graph it this way, okay? From here, I could go ahead and choose an ordered pair and say, okay, well, I'll pick this point because I can't pick this one because that's the y-intercept. So let me pick this point, and this point right here is 2, 1, 2, 3, 3. So this could have been one of the coordinate points or the ordered pairs. I could have chosen 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, and any of these other points. You could have chose -2, 1, -4, 0. Any of those points would have been acceptable, okay? So let's see if we do the table of values, could we get in the exact same spot? Because some people plotted it using or graphed this using this method. Other people used the table whenever they tried to attempt this problem. So I would always start with 0, okay, which means I'm going to have y equals 1/2 times 0 plus 2. So that cancels out and just gives me 2. So I'm left with 0, 2. So this matches my y-intercept that I found just by looking at the y equals mx plus b format. Now I'm going to pick another number. And because I see this half right here, I'm actually going to look to the denominator and choose a number that is divisible by 2 so I can get this to be a whole number. So I'm actually going to choose 2. And I'm going to say y equals 1/2 times 2 plus 2. So 1 times 2 is 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I have 1 plus 2 gives me 3. So I have 2, 3. And that is that point right there. I'm going to choose another one. So this time I'm going to choose -2 because I know it's a multiple of 2. So I say y equals 1/2 times -2 plus 2. And so then I'm going to say, wait a second. Where am I? Oh. So -2 over here. So -2 divided by 2 is going to be -1. -1 plus 2 is actually 1. So I'm going to have -2, 1. Sorry, I was getting myself twisted around and was afraid I was repeating my y-intercept. So this would be -2 and up 1. Do we see how that falls on the line? Okay, so this could have also been an ordered pair that you would put in there. So you would either need to have shown this type of work, something like this, identifying what is M and B, and how you would be able to graph this line. All right, let's move on to question number 3. Let's see, if I can navigate. All right, so question number 3 says, what is the slope of the line? So I'm already telling myself M equals rise over run. All right, so there would be 2 different ways we could do this. We could count it or we could calculate it. Okay, both ways would be correct if you do it right. So if I were to count it, I would start at this point and I'm going to do rise, my up and down over my run. So when I count, I'm going to say I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I went up 5. And then I'd say I had to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in order to get over to the next point that would keep me on the line. So I would say the answer is 5 over 6 because up is positive and right is positive. Now, if I wanted to calculate this, I could always label these points as x1, y1, and I could say this is x2, y2, and I could follow the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 and plug in the number. So I would say 6 minus 1 over x2, which is 6, minus x1, which is 0, gives me 5 over 6. So either way, whether you count or you calculate, you should come up with 5, 6. All right? Let's see, number 4. All right? It says, find the slope of the line. So I'm saying, what is M? Right? Find the slope of the line through the points -10, 18 and 5, 2. Is the line horizontal, vertical, increasing, or decreasing? Okay, so the slope of the line is, and then it told me that I would use the slash bar to be able to make a fraction. Okay, so I had a lot of people that chose to graph this so that they could count it. All right, so they did all these different hash marks. All right, they made their graph, okay, and they did -10 and they did 18, and it was somewhere up here. All right, and then they graphed 5, 2, and it was somewhere over here, and then they drew their line. Whoop. And this is not exact, by the way, guys, okay? This is just a rough sketch so that you could kind of see what the graph looked like, all right? The ultimate goal of this question was for you to label this as x1, y1, x2, y2, and use the formula that I just reviewed in the previous question and use that to determine what the slope was. So if I was to do that, I would say y2 was 2 minus 18 over x2, which is 5, minus negative 10. So that would give me negative 16 over 15. So we were looking for negative 16 over 15, or you could have put 16 over negative 15. As long as there was only one negative sign, it didn't matter how you wrote it. All right. And that would make sense because that's going to say I'm going to come down 16 and I'm going to go over 15. All right. And so when we say the line, is it horizontal, vertical, increasing, or decreasing? Well, I know it's not horizontal because horizontal would mean that it's a line that looks like this. Vertical would be a line like this, and my line doesn't look like that. Increasing means that from left to right, it's increasing. Well, that's not true. It is decreasing, okay? Or it is a negative slope as we go from left to right. So the answer here was decreasing. And even if all you did was calculate the slope and not graph it, you should have known it was decreasing because it had the negative in front of it. All right? Okay, guys, question number 5. Let's see. All right, so this one says, identify the type of slope and whether it is directly proportional or not for the following situations, okay? So first we got to know slope, and then we need to know proportional, yes or no. So the types of slope that we're talking about would be that it was a positive slope, and these were the drop downs, okay, for each of them. For a negative slope, you could have had an undefined slope, or you could have had a zero slope. So those were your 4 choices for types of slope. And then for proportional, it was proportional or not proportional. So those were the drop down options for each of these, okay? So when we look at this, y equals negative 2/3 x, all right? So the slope is, well, I'm going to overlay y equals mx plus b, which this is a plus 0, right? That is invisible. I'm going to line this up and say that my slope is negative 2/3, which means the slope is negative because the sign on the number is negative. Then I say, is the relationship proportional or not proportional? Well, if it's going to be a proportional relationship, then it goes through the origin, and it also has a constant slope. And so that would say, yes, this is a proportional relationship because it checks the 2 boxes of being a straight line with a constant slope, and it goes through the origin, which both things must be true to be proportional. All right. All right, moving on to this picture right here. So when I look at this line, it is increasing as I go from left to right, okay? It is increasing, which means that slope is positive, all right? And then when I look at the relationship, well, yes, it is a straight line, check, but it does not go through the origin. So I'm going to say this is not proportional, all right? Okay, so let's see here on this table, all right? So it wants to know what the slope is, okay? So this is where we would do our jumps, all right? So here we had plus 0, we had plus 0 because 2, 2, 2, that stayed the same, right? And then this one, we added 5, and this one we added 5, okay? And so if I were to sketch this, maybe you're like, Ms. G, I did not think about the jumps. Well, then how about we just try to sketch the graph, all right? So it doesn't mean that everything has to be perfectly outlined. Again, we're just sketching so that we can get a visual of what's going on. 2, negative 10 means I'm going to go to the right 2, and I'm going to go down 10, all right? Well, then I have 2, negative 5. I'm going to go over 2, and I'm going to go down 5. Again, this might not be to scale. Then I'm going to say I'm going to go over 2 and stay on the x-axis. Well, this is a vertical line, okay? And if I were to look at my change in y over the change in x, right, with my jumps, I need to know that my slope is change in y over change in x. And if I can't remember that this slope is actually an undefined slope, I should have been able to prove it to myself by putting the change in y, 5, over the change in x. Is it possible for us to divide by 0 in math? No, it is not, which is why this is undefined for the slope because it's a vertical line. All right. And then when we look at the relationship is, well, it is a straight line, right? However, it does not go through the origin, and it's that special undefined line. So this would be not proportional, right? Because it doesn't even have a slope because it is undefined. Yes? Okay. All right. Last one here. So I have a horizontal line, and it looks like it's at 1, 2, 3. So the equation for this line would say y equals 3, because y is always 3, but x can be whatever it wants. So if you remember, a horizontal line, the slope is 0, all right? But if you couldn't remember, you could have chosen 2 different points. I could choose this point, and I could have calculated the slope to prove it to myself. I could say, well, this point is 2, 3, and this point is 0, 3. So if I were to do my slope formula and say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, I would say 0 over 2, and 0 divided by anything is 0. All right, so even if you could not remember the horizontal line, we should have been able to use our slope skills to be able to calculate and prove it to ourselves. All right, then we look, the relationship is, well, it has a constant slope, but it does not go through the origin, right? And this is that special horizontal line. So the relationship is not proportional. All right, guys, over halfway there. So moving on to question number 6. It says the total amount y in dollars in your savings account after buying X video games is represented by the equation y equals 100 minus 15x. You have $40 in your account after buying video games. How many video games did you buy? All right. So let's go ahead and say what we know, okay? So we have the y and the x. So we say y, the units are dollars. X is video games, okay? We also know that they gave us y equals 100 minus 15x as a relationship between your savings account and the number of video games that you bought. And it also says that $40 in account after buying video games. Okay, so total amount in the savings account. They gave us 40, okay? And so now we're going to end up solving this to be able to figure out how many games did you buy. Okay, so we could say y equals 100 minus 15x. I would ask, where does the 40 go? Am I going to plug this in for x, or am I going to plug this in for y? Well, I look at the units, okay? I say this is dollars, and y is dollars. So I'm going to plug this 40 in right here. So I'm going to say 40 equals 100 minus 15x. All right? So this is where we now need to solve for x, and if you needed to, you could bubble and box, all right? And you could solve for x. So I'm going to go ahead and say minus 100. Okay, so that gives me negative 60 equals negative 15x. Then I would divide by negative 15. And 60 divided by 15 is 4. The negative divided by the negative turns it into a positive. So I'm going to say x equals 4 video games. All right? And you could gut check yourself and say, okay, video games were the 15 times 4, and you can kind of talk yourself through it, okay, even if the equation doesn't quite make sense to you. All right? But matching up the units and writing this information here is key to being able to know how to use the formula or the equation they give you. All right? Okay, let's move on to question number 7. All right? It says the profit y in dollars for a business from selling X gloves is represented by y equals 21x. Graph the linear equation on your paper, meaning you needed to graph here. Many people did not do that. And fill in the blanks that describe what your graph looks like. Do not put spaces when typing in your answers. Put a comma in between your two values, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and write down Y is dollars, X is gloves, and they told me Y equals 21X. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and overlay Y equals MX plus B, right? Because that's the slope formula, and the slope-intercept formula. So when I see this plus B by itself, I'm just going to add the invisible 0. So when it says the y-intercept of the graph is, well, the origin is 0, 0, right? Okay, so if I have sold 0 gloves, I make $0. That's what that means, right? Okay. So it says the slope is, and when I look at how I've overlaid y equals mx plus b, the 21 is my slope. You could have also put 21 over 1 as well. Okay. So again, we're talking about a business, you're selling gloves, and this is your profit, okay, in dollars. And it depends on how many gloves you sell. And it makes sense that you would make $0 in profit when you sell 0 sets of gloves, right? Okay. And it looks like you make $21 per pair of gloves. So then it says the ordered pair, and this got covered up by the graph, but online it said the ordered pair is a solution to the linear equation. Do not use the y-intercept. So you would have needed to make sure that you were reading everything online and on your paper. Okay, see the parentheses here for the ordered pair, which means we need to either graph this thing and put it here and pick an ordered pair off the table, or you could draw a table of values in order to do that as well. Okay, and both ways would have been right. Okay, it would have gotten you to the same spot. Okay, so if we were to go ahead and create a table of values, I would say, okay, when I choose 0 gloves sold, that means y equals 21 times 0 equals 0. That's 0, 0. I already knew that from answering my question, but let's fill it out because I always pick 0. Now if I sell one set of gloves, right, that says y equals 21 times 1 equals 21. So that coordinate point is 1, 21. All right. Now, normally I could go with a -1, but does that make sense in this situation to sell negative pairs of gloves? Not really. So I'm going to go ahead and choose 2 and say y equals 21 times 2 equals 42, which means if I sell 2 pairs of gloves, I make $42. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and graph this, and then we'll talk about how to graph it just from the equation and show how it matches up. But I have got to label the parts of my graph, and I've got to make sure I put a scale so I know what I'm looking at. So here is the x-axis, here is the y-axis. My notes over here told me that x is in number of gloves and y is in dollars. All right, so when I look at my coordinates here, it looks like for the x, it's totally fine for me to go by 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and here though, I have to get all the way up to 42, all right, to be able to plot this. So maybe I can't go by ones, correct? So how many spots do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so what could I go by so that I could actually get to these numbers, all right? And I would argue that we could go, that we could go by 9s, you could just go by 10s, and you could estimate it. So I'm just going to go by 10s because that would get me all the way to 50. So if I say that's $10, that's $20, that's $30, that's $40, that's $50. So if I want to plot this, I already have my origin here. 1, 21 is about right here, just above that 20. And if I have 242, I say 2, and then I have my 42 right here. And I'm able to graph this line because it asked for me here to graph the linear equation on my paper. So I was supposed to have a graph on this piece of paper, okay? Now when I look at this, I can say, okay, let's see if it matches up if I were to simply do it this way by using the information that b equals 0 and m equals 21. So the very first step would be to plot b, which is 0, 0. And then we would use our slope to move, right? Well, let's see if it moves along our line. So my slope is 21 over 1. I would go up 21 over 1. I would go up 21 over 1. Well, check. It works out and we get on the same line on the graph. Okay? So for the ordered pair, if you had made a table of values, you could have just chosen one of the values from your table that was not the the y-intercept, because the instruction said not to choose that one. Or if you had just used this method using the format and pulling out B and M and plotted it, you could have picked the point off of the table or off the graph and still submitted it as an ordered pair, because an ordered pair is just a coordinate point, which means it is a solution to the line because it falls on the line. All right, moving on to number 8. It says the distance y in miles that train A travels in x hours is represented by the equation y equals 72x. The graph shows the distance that train B travels. Okay, so this is train B by the graph. Train A, okay, they told me travels by, they gave it to me in an equation form. I'm going to go ahead and write down my units. I'm going to say that y equals the miles, and I'm going to say that x equals the hours. And the question that they're asking me is down here. It says, is train A faster or slower than train B? So I'm saying, is train A faster or slower, okay, than train B? So I've got to make sure I'm answering the right question, right, that I haven't forgotten. So that's what I'm actually answering. So this says y equals 72x. So for train A, y equals 72x means that its slope, y equals mx plus b. It makes sense that if you are at 0 hours, you've gone 0 miles, right? Okay, but this looks like I have an m of 72 miles per hour, okay? Now, when I come over here, I need to find out what is the slope of train B. Well, in order to find the slope, I can simply count it. So I'm just going to go up and I'm going to go over. And so for train B, I'm going to say rise over run was 68 over 1, which means the slope for train B was 68 miles per hour. And then I start to compare the two, because the question is train A, this one, faster or slower than train B compared to this one? Well, 72 is bigger than 68, which means that train A is faster than train B. All right? Some people also plotted this point. They went ahead and graphed this and overlaid it on this graph, which was awesome. So they would have gone up 72 and over 1. They would have gone up another 72 and over again, okay? And they found that the line was just slightly, I'm not going to be able to do it here, but slightly steeper, which meant that it was faster because it had a steeper slope, okay? All right, guys, question number 9. It says, the total amount of sap Y in ounces collected from a tree after X weeks is represented by the equation Y equals 4X plus 6. How much more sap is there after 4 weeks than after 2 weeks? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write what I know down. I know that Y is the ounces of sap, right? I know that X is the number of weeks. They gave me the equation Y equals 4X plus 6 to describe the relationship, okay, between the ounces of sap and the number of weeks. And the question is they want to know if I looked at how much sap was in 4 weeks, and I said, then I looked at the sap after 2 weeks, how much was the difference? So when I see how much more, I'm going to think difference, because I'm going to have to subtract the 2. So I'm going to take this 4 weeks and I'm going to plug that in. See how X is for weeks? I'm going to plug it in for that X. So I'm going to say at 4 weeks, Y equals 4 times 4 plus 6, which is 22 ounces of sap. Okay? Now, if I were to look at 2 weeks, I would say y equals 4 times, now I'm going to plug this 2 in for x plus 6. So 4 times 2 is 8 plus 6 is 14 ounces. And then I'm going to say they wanted to know how much more did I have at 4 weeks than I did at 2, which means I have to take 22 minus 14, and that is going to give me 8 ounces of sap. All right, guys, so I hope that this was helpful walking you through and that you actually listened to the thought process behind answering these questions. Please make sure that you have your correction sheet on the separate sheet of paper where you were writing all of your work for all of your missed questions. You're going to need to staple that to your test and turn that in.